Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Buck OVA Hour. This is the first in a new series of monthly webinars that will focus on deepening our understanding of women's health and the incredible role that female reproductive biology plays in every aspect of a woman's life. In each episode, we will invite leading scientists, doctors, and thought leaders to come together and to share and discuss what is known, not known, and what still needs to be discovered in this surprisingly understudied and underfunded area of science. My name is Brian Van Weel, and I'm the Chief Philanthropic Officer at the Buck Institute. The Buck was the world's first independent research institute dedicated solely to the study of aging and to ending the threat of age-related disease. And it's my team's mission to raise awareness and the resources necessary to support this groundbreaking research and the amazing individual scientists working every day in their labs to make it possible for all of us to live healthier, longer lives. We're so excited you're here and to have the opportunity to share a promising new direction and area of focus for the Buck. This story began 2 years ago when Nicole Shanahan, a successful patent attorney, entrepreneur, and president of the BioEcho Foundation, came to the Buck with some very challenging questions about women's reproductive health and longevity. Why does a woman's fertility fall off a cliff when she's only in her mid-30s? Why are some reproductive interventions like egg freezing so difficult and often unreliable? Why does menopause accelerate aging in women and place them at higher risk for age-related disease? Why is there so little research looking into these issues? And why is the research being done often so male-focused and dominated? Wouldn't investing in women-centered research potentially bring better opportunities, choice, and improved health to every woman on the planet? And isn't this lack of focus and investment failing women and perpetuating inequality? These were all important and very compelling questions. And it made sense to bring them to the Buck because we know that ovaries age almost twice as fast as every other organ in a woman's body. My wife and I experienced that firsthand when we were trying to start our family in our early and mid-30s. So we know aging is a major driver impacting women's health, fertility, and experience of menopause. So researching these issues within the context of human aging was Nicole's stroke of genius. And answering these questions became the driving force for partnering with her to create the world's first Center for Reproductive Longevity and Equality, a center of research and discovery to investigate these questions and to search for solutions that will ultimately improve the lives and health of women of all ages. And not surprisingly, as we embarked on this journey, we've discovered that the same questions Nicole had are shared by so many women and men confronted with these realities and concerned about the health and future of every woman in their life: wives, mothers, daughters, and granddaughters. We're also seeing how this lack of good science-backed data and research makes it hard for anyone trying to make educated and informed decisions about their health and family. And so we're hoping to turn the tide through our research at the center, by reaching out and collaborating with scientists and investigators all over the world, and by offering educational opportunities like this webinar series. We are hoping to create a worldwide community of people who care and want to come together to create change, to ignite a movement that will unlock all of the resources necessary to advance and accelerate progress. This research is long overdue, and there's much to be done. So to start us off and launch this OVA Hour, I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Jennifer Garrison. She's a principal investigator at the Buck and is the faculty director of our new Consortium for Reproductive Longevity and Equality, She's a pioneering researcher and has been instrumental in bringing our new center to life. As our first speaker, she will help introduce and frame many of the topics and concepts we will be bringing to you throughout the OVA series. She will also share many of the scientific questions we are hoping to answer and why doing so is so vitally important. I've no doubt her talk will inspire questions for you. So anytime during the presentation, please submit any question you have by clicking on the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. We'll make sure to leave time for a short Q&A session at the end of Jennifer's talk. Thank you again for joining us today. And now here is Dr. Jennifer Garrison.
Everybody in the audience is going to be familiar with this graph. Beginning sometime in midlife, we're all going to go through this stereotype decline in our bodies that we call aging. And more or less, this is happening everywhere. Every single one of these lines is probably very familiar to all of us. But there's one notable exception here, and that is a woman's reproductive capacity. So, aging of the female reproductive system really poses this paradox, as Brian alluded to. The female germline, like the male, it's immortal and it gets passed on from generation to generation. But unlike in the male, in women, it's aging precociously. And so this is what I want to talk about today, this picture. But this clip that we're looking at here, this is not the entire story. So while men have, they're generating millions of new sperm, a girl is born with the one and only lifetime supply of eggs that she's going to have. So somewhere around the 26th week of gestation, a female fetus has developed a reproductive system and has made about 6 or 7 million eggs in her ovaries. So if you step back and think about that for a minute, what that means is that although I was born in the 1970s, the egg that I came from was actually created in my grandmother's womb in 1956. So, it's sort of like female reproductive matrilineal lines look like a nested Russian doll. It's very much like science fiction. But at this time, at 26 weeks of gestation, a woman has about 7 million eggs, but by the time she's born, that number will drop to about 1 million. By the time she reaches puberty, that'll go closer to 300,000. And at that point, she'll begin to lose eggs at about a rate of 1,000 per month. And the age of menopause is really when a woman runs out of eggs, when that number goes down to 0. And menopause is really one of the most robust features of human physiology. It's something that all women will face at some point in their lives. But this graph that I'm showing right now, which every woman has been shown and every woman knows, it's characterized by this single point of inflection and then a cliff. And the question is this really an inevitable truth? And so I would argue not, and I'll tell you why. So it is true, there's no question, that ovaries age at about twice the rate of the tissue in the rest of the body, as Brian mentioned. In fact, ovarian function begins to decline when a woman's in her 20s. They're considered geriatric when a woman's in her 30s, when the rest of a woman's body is really at peak performance. And so, if the ovary is reaching its maximum potential before even its first use, that's a really interesting and unusual problem, right? The rest of your body is aging at approximately the same rate. And we think that it's possible, if we can figure out why ovaries are aging so precociously, that it might have clues for aging in the rest of the tissues in our body. But this isn't really entirely about fertility. I want to come back to this chart. So, this is the chart that we've been shown. And in fact, it's actually true that on average, this is what's happening. But this is an inaccurate model at the level of an individual woman. So at the level of an individual, fertility is not a bank that only goes in one direction. It's stochastic and it's cyclical. And some women have random spikes in fertility well into their 50s. Some young women go through periods of infertility. It is one of the most multivariate signatures of biology in the human body. And so we need to treat it like a multivariate issue. And like I said, this is not just about fertility, but it is complicated. It's actually so much more than fertility. So there's a positive correlation between the age at which a woman goes through menopause and how long they live overall. So there's multiple studies that have shown that women who go through menopause later in life tend to live longer. And they also have things like enhanced ability to repair their DNA, lots of cool things that help with extended longevity. But in women who go through menopause earlier, tend to live less long. But what's really interesting about this, and I think something that a lot of people don't realize, is that male brothers of sisters who go through menopause later in life also tend to have longer lifespans. So why is that? This would indicate that there's some sort of genetic component to what's happening, but it would also tell us that understanding how and why ovaries age prematurely is going to have direct implications for understanding aging in the rest of the body, including men. So I hope all you men out there who are listening just sat up and started paying attention if you weren't already. The other thing I wanted to point out, I'm not going to show you a lot of data. This is pretty much the only other graph I'm going to show you. But if you take a look at this, take a look at the ages along the bottom of this graph. So menopause, the age at menopause, is one of the widest spanning biological phenomenon there is, meaning, women are considered to go through early menopause before the age of 40. They're considered to go through late menopause after the age of 54. So that's like a 14-year period of normal. And we really don't understand why there's so much variability between individuals. And this gets back to this idea that it's a complex problem, but it's actually really interesting at the level of the biology. So beyond reproduction, the end of fertility sets off a cascade of negative health effects in a woman's body. And I don't want to be sounding negative here, but it's true. And I think a lot of young women and probably a lot of men don't realize this, that menopause, even in healthy females, has a quality, it greatly decreases quality of life. It increases risk of things like cognitive decline, heart disease, stroke, osteoporosis, weight gain, just to name a few. And long before menopause, so long before a woman reaches her 40s or 50s and starts to go through this reproductive decline, there's a really strong connection between health and reproductive function. So even in young women, if there's an underlying dysfunction in reproductive organs, this can profoundly affect the rest of the body. So for example, women who have polycystic ovarian syndrome or PCOS, even when they're young, they're prone to things like metabolic diseases, and they can actually pass that on to their sons and their daughters. So every aspect of a woman's life is influenced by the fact that her reproductive span is limited. Her overall health, her career decisions, if she wants to have biological children, then her family planning decisions. So we think about this really as an issue of equity. Reproductive longevity, a woman's health, and her choices are all inextricably linked. And that is why we are doing what we're doing. So menopause is not a biological imperative. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't realize. It may not even be necessary. We humans are actually in the minority. There are very few species that go through menopause. There's human females, a couple of species of whale, and possibly a species of New World monkey, although that's a little bit controversial. So the science behind menopause is really fascinating. The science behind fertility is really fascinating, but it's woefully incomplete. The question of why men can produce sperm through their lives, but women are unable to make eggs after that first initial production in utero, we simply don't know why that happens. And we need to figure this out. And this is where the work that we're doing comes in. If you think about it, women who are born today are going to have a projected lifespan of nearly 100 years, if not more. And so what that means is that if this graph doesn't change, then soon women are going to live more of their lives after menopause, after all of those negative health impacts are triggered, than before menopause. And so this chart, I'm bringing it back, that every woman is made to believe is an undeniable truth. This is an inaccurate model. We're stuck in this model that there's this cliff that we fall off of and there's nothing we can do about it. But in fact, every woman has their own unique model. And the thing that we're trying to do is reframe this problem. If you imagine, that we could potentially increase the number of eggs a woman has, even by 1% in her 40s, that would delay the onset of menopause by 5 or 10 years, and that would have a profound effect on her overall well-being and her health. And so, the goal of what we're trying to do here is not to enable women to have babies into their 70s, although increased fertility outcomes will be something we hope that will be a side benefit of what we're trying to do here. But what we want to do is we want to fund research and do research around this question. What are the fundamental drivers of ovarian aging in women? What are the biological cues or timers that signals the female reproductive system to decline in a woman's 4th decade with such incredible reproducibility? I mean, if you think about it, this is one of the most robust phenomenon in biology. And until we know that very important, that whatever that timer is or that cue, until we know what it is, everything we do is simply going to be a Band-Aid. It's just engineering Band-Aids. And I want to point out, while I have this graph up, that we don't know where along this timeline, whether it's in utero, during development, during adolescence, during early adulthood, or even during middle age, we don't understand at what point that cue or timer is triggered. And so there is just an enormous number of really important unanswered basic biological questions that we don't know the answer to. We don't know what makes a good egg, believe it or not. And for those of you who aren't convinced yet, I wanted to also point out that there's a profound economic impact of reproductive decline in females on the world. So these are just a few numbers that I wanted to throw out there. So right now in the US, there are 50 million women actively going through menopause. And that number increases by about 2 million per year just in this country. But by 2025, there's going to be over a billion women experiencing menopause in the world. And let that sink in for a minute. So if the projected population of the world in 2025 is going to be around 8 billion, that means that 12% of the population are going to be actively going through menopause. Now, for young women or for men, or, for women who are past menopause, you might think, well, this doesn't really affect me. But actually, if you consider the economic costs, they are staggering. The symptoms, the less serious health symptoms that are associated with menopause, things like hot flashes, things like night sweats, those are experienced by approximately 75% of women who are going through menopause. And those, along with the very serious health risks that we talked about earlier, those things can have a significant reduction in a woman's quality of life, increase her use of medical resources, and lead to an overall productivity loss at work. So the estimates, and these are the low ends of the estimates. I didn't put the range, but they go a lot higher than what I've listed here. So the estimate for the additional healthcare burden of menopausal women experiencing these symptoms is around $600 billion globally per year. Then the economic burden of productivity losses from missed work are well over 100 billion a year. And these numbers are only going to go up as more women go through menopause. So, yeah. So as a society, I think we can no longer afford to ignore the fact that reproductive longevity is an important question. And so I've told you that we don't understand even the most basic things about how it works. And I've told you that it's incredibly important. And these two things seem to be, a little bit of a paradox. So why is it that, what are the challenges here? Why is it that, we're not figuring this out faster? And there's many reasons, but one of the major reasons is a lack of funding. So, this field, which really hasn't been a field except for the last few years, this field is dramatically underfunded. So what I'm showing you here is the overall National Institutes of Health budget for 2018. Now, the National Institutes of Health are the major funding source for governmental funding for research in the US. And this is unlike the National Science Foundation, the NIH really focuses on questions and problems related to human health. And so this is where the bulk of the the governmental funding would come from to study these questions. And as a scientist, this is where I apply for all of my grants. So in 2018, the overall NIH budget was somewhere just north of $36 billion. And what I'm showing you in blue is all of the money, which is about $5.5 billion, that went towards women's health. So women's health overall, everything to do with women's health, from every aspect of women's health that you can imagine. And then this tiny little sliver of hot pink is the amount of money that went towards female reproductive aging research. So it's infinitesimally small. And we were really broad and generous in what we defined as female reproductive aging research. But we put this number somewhere around $43 million in 2018. So that's less than 1%, significantly less than 1% of the overall budget. But the picture here is not totally dire. So we've been spending a lot of time in dialogue with not just governmental funding agencies, but also private foundations and philanthropic initiatives to shine light on this problem. And that's part of what we're doing here today. So what we want to do here, and what Brian talked about, is to tell you about the center and the consortium that we have launched out of the Buck Institute. So, you know, if the dominant narrative in this area is that reproductive longevity is limited to this very finite window during adulthood, which is much shorter for women than for men, we basically want to find out whether or not we can change that. To think about how, if women weren't constrained in their reproductive choices by this limited clock, if we could think about, you know, the social, economic, and personal empowerment that would come from basically the freedom of choice and the freedom from health risks that would come from, you know, finding out what causes ovarian aging and either slowing it down or reversing it, would be extraordinary. So what Brian told you about at the beginning was the center. So the Center for Female Reproductive Longevity and Equality was started a few years ago. And when we started the center, it became apparent that we needed to complement our efforts here at the Buck Institute by building an ecosystem to support research in this area, to make this, to shout this message from the mountaintops, and to get people outside of the Buck involved as well. And so that's where the Global Consortium comes in. And they're both initiatives that are run here, and I'm really excited about them. So the goal ultimately is to one day, basically to find out what's causing ovarian aging and to delay the onset of age-related diseases in women and in men. So when we started the center, this was 2 years ago, we launched this initiative, and it was the first facility in the world to focus solely on reproductive longevity and equality as it relates to aging. And the goal was really to establish the center as a global thought leader, as a resource in the field, and as a place where people are doing research that combines reproductive biology and geroscience, you know, the study of aging. And the scientists here that I've got pictures of everybody who's participating in the center right now, and we hope to grow it as much as we can in the future. But we're really all focused around coming at this problem from different directions, but trying to, you know, answer this fundamental question. What is the biological timer or cue that leads to reproductive decline in females? And, you know, when we started the center, we quickly discovered that, you know, there are surprisingly few people working on this problem. And I just told you that one of the reasons for that is a real lack of funding in the area. So once we established it, we realized that we needed to go bigger, that essentially we needed to broaden our reach, to strengthen our reach, to build a network of scientists who are in academia, but also in biotech, and thought leaders who are not scientists, ambassadors from all over the world, to promote this collaborative dialogue about women and aging and health. And the goal here really is to, you know, and it's a lofty goal, I'll admit that. But if we're going to build an entire research field in a novel way, we need to cultivate relationships with other organizations and funders on a more global scale in order to strengthen our outcomes. So in essence, what we're trying to do is to build an ecosystem. So we're going to build the ecosystem around female reproductive aging research. And what we want to do is multi-pronged. So we want to fund scientists who are pursuing bold and innovative ideas with a potential to transform the field. We want to accelerate and facilitate how fast things are being translated from the bench, so from the discoveries that scientists are making in their labs to the clinic. We want to make things move faster than they normally do. And so, that's a tricky problem. And so, the ecosystem that we're trying to build really has three different parts to it. And, the first part is obviously the funding. If there's no money, we can't work on, if I don't have a grant for something, I am not, even if I think it's the most important problem in the universe, I can't work on it. So one of the things we've done is to give away grants to fund research in this area. And to build the field, we really need to get people who wouldn't normally talk to each other to interact. And so part of that is building collaborations between the scientists we funded, other scientists in the field, but also, people who are in biotech and in pharma, people who know how to translate scientific discoveries to useful diagnostics or therapeutics. And we want to get scientists to share ideas, to share data, to basically foster this collaborative environment between scientists that goes beyond traditional models. If we're building this thing from the beginning, we can do it our way. But then at the same time, we want to galvanize support from non-scientist leaders who are going to support our efforts. And so in addition to funding, in addition to building this network of people, we're also actually just now started the very first ovarian biology core facility. So for scientists, what we want to do is bring people in from outside the field. We want to harness as much creative, thoughtful, amazing science out there. We want to bring people who are already established and working maybe in another field. We want to bring this to their attention and hopefully, invite them to join us here. And so the core facility basically lowers the barrier to entry for people who haven't worked on ovarian biology before. And that's something that we're really excited about here at the Buck. And then beyond that, we're building this intellectual network. And part of that is having an online dialogue. Part of that is having outreach like this webinar and other webinars that we put together. And part of it is really just spreading the word. And so I hope that by the end of this, you'll want to join us here. So I'm very, very proud that we were able to give away our first grants, our very first funding from the Global Consortium last August. We funded 23 different scientists from all over the world to work on these key questions around why ovaries age prematurely. And I am also proud that of those 23 scientists, 18 were women, which was really, really, really exciting. And this is, I don't expect you to read this slide, but I wanted to just give you a flavor for the kinds of science that are represented among our grantees. So on the left is this wheel that's focused around the hallmarks of female reproductive aging. And so there's a lot of different things that can go wrong, and many of the things that happen during reproductive aging sort of mirror what's happening in other tissues. But we have scientists who are working essentially along every step of that graph I showed you earlier. And we have people trying to understand, what are the fundamental drivers or molecules that communicate between the brain and the reproductive organs, and how do those change with age, how things like environment and metabolism and diet actually can influence how fast a woman's reproductive organs age. Then we have people who are actually testing therapeutics in preclinical models for slowing down ovarian aging. And we're also funding people who are looking for biomarkers, because right now we really don't have any useful or comprehensive biomarkers that will allow a woman to know, in my individual biological trajectory, where am I on that curve? Because every woman is different. And so trying to find markers that will actually let us know what's happening is just something that is so important. So we feel like the time is now. We can't wait any longer to advance this field. And we're welcoming everyone, including scientists, but also, anyone who has an interest in this area. Like with any ecosystem, we need stakeholders who are coming from industry, from academia, but also from philanthropy, from governmental agencies, from the general public. Just sitting down and having a conversation about some of the stuff that I just communicated with, friends or family or people who, might also have an interest here. We want people to understand this at a level where the imperative is obvious. Excuse me. So we do have an online presence with a network communications platform where people can talk to each other, share questions, share thoughts, share papers and research. And part of what we're doing here with this webinar series and with OVA in general is to be able to plug you into this network, to give you a chance to stay up to date on everything that's going on, and to hear about the latest research. So this is just the beginning. We really need you all to be ambassadors and to spread the word. So we did write a white paper about what we're doing, and it's available on the Buck Institute website. So if I can leave you with anything, just anything to remember, I would just say that, thinking about ovarian aging might seem like a very female specific problem, but it really isn't. It's going to affect every single person on the planet in one way or another. And so what we're trying to do here is to understand fundamental basic biology around ovarian aging. And until we do that, everything that we do really will be a Band-Aid. If you think about like IVF, I see there's a lot of questions coming in, so I imagine that probably someone's asked a question about IVF. IVF has been around for 40 years, literally over 40 years. I think it's 43 years since the first baby was born using assisted reproductive technologies. And IVF is spectacular in what it allows women to do, but it's incredibly limited. And there hasn't been a huge amount of research that's focused on trying to understand what makes a good egg, or why it is that, at around the age of 35, if you're trying to retrieve eggs, your likelihood of getting quality eggs is really minuscule, right? It's not just the number of eggs that declines over time in a woman's body, it's also the quality of those eggs. We don't know why, we don't know what the qualities are that make a good egg, and we're trying to figure that out. So if you have a chance, take a look, please. And I wanted to also just mention that, Brian's going to tell you about this amazing membership group he created called OVA to stay connected and informed. And we really do want you to help us pioneer this new movement. So we're going to be bringing educational content and webinars like this every month. And next month, if you want to join us, we'll be talking on June 3rd to Lizelle La Follette, who is a spectacularly creative and wonderful physician, actually. So she's an OB/GYN here in Marin, and she is passionate about women's health, and she has a really laser-focused mind. She has an amazing presence, and the things she's observed in her practice and the connections she's been able to make between what she sees in patients and what we're doing in the lab is really unique. I have to say that, this is one of those conversations that we're trying to facilitate. Basic scientists talking to clinicians about what they see in their practice, because doctors see things that scientists never hear about ever. And it's those sorts of conversations that are so important for fostering things to move more quickly. And beyond that, if you think about from a clinical perspective, what tools physicians have available to them right now. They're just so limited. When I talk to physicians who are treating women who have fertility problems, you know, they almost, there's just a very small number of things that they can offer. And, you know, with that sort of absence of information and absence of useful therapeutics and useful diagnostics, it sort of leads to this vacuum that really leaves a lot of women, I would say, in a place where they don't have a lot of control over what's happening. And so, you know, we're going to talk about how reproductive longevity relates to women's health, but from a more of a patient-centric perspective. And if you have never heard Liz Ellen talk, you do not want to miss this. So I think I'm going to turn this over to you now, Brian.
Fantastic. Jennifer is terrific. So interesting, and just the beginning, as you said. And one of the things that Jennifer mentioned was that we really are at the beginning, and there is so much to learn and discover and share. And as we've been talking to donors and people that are interested in this work over the last 2 years, one of the things that we've been asked to do is to create an opportunity for people to stay connected and informed, and to have also the opportunity to come together and share stories and information. And so one of the really great things that we're really excited to introduce is a new membership group called OVA, which we are just launching today. And the whole purpose of it is to help people, as Jennifer said, stay connected, informed, and to share this information, and to learn with us as we continue on this path, and as we continue to learn also with all the researchers we're working with across the world. And so our vision for OVA is that it will be a community that will be building something together, that we will evolve, and that we will continue to get this information out. As Jennifer said, we want to spread the word. The other piece that Jennifer touched on that I think is really important is that we can't do the science, we can't investigate the questions that are so important without the support of funding from whether it's government or foundations or even individuals. And so one of the things that we, as part of our effort to get the word out, is also to bring people in and get them involved and engaged, and get them so that they can participate in some of this work along with us. So by joining OVA, which is $100 per year, we tried to keep it extremely affordable and accessible to everybody. There are a number of benefits that come along with that. First of all, access to these live stream webinars. We're going to make the next couple of these live stream webinars free and available to anybody. But moving forward, they will be, the live stream versions will be available to OVA members only, and we'll have recorded versions available for other folks. We will make unlimited access to OVA presentations available to our OVA members. And we're also going to begin building a digital library of articles and papers that we will collect and curate from our researchers, and share those as well, so that you can begin and continue with learning and educating yourself about all of these amazing issues and topics. And then finally, we will, once we get post-pandemic, we will be having in-person meetings and events, and all of the members, of course, will have early registration privilege for those. So we're very excited about this. I think it is really kind of a call to action to address so many of these issues, and to really advance and accelerate this research. So we really do hope you join. To join, you can go to the Buck website, and you can click on Support Women's Health, or you can even just do a search for OVA. If you're interested in learning more about some of the projects and research currently underway, we'll be covering a lot of those in future webinars. Again, it's a monthly webinar, and so each one will be introducing new scientists and thought leaders that you can engage and talk to. But you can also email us at ova@buckinstitute.org, and we will be happy to follow up on any specific interests that you have, and get you as involved as possible. So I think that is really the last piece that we wanted to cover before we open up for Q&A. So we can go ahead and I think stop sharing screens. And we do have a number of questions that have come in, so thank you for that. You know, one of the questions that came in right at the beginning was a number of questions about menopause, as you might expect. And I thought one of the things that is unusual about Nicole's vision and also how we're approaching this is really that tie to equality and equity. And so one of the questions, the first question that came in is, can you speak a little bit, Jennifer, about how menopause is tied to equality and how that figures into the work that we're doing?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, well, as it turns out, I'm a woman, so I will go through menopause at some point. But, you know, from the moment that I went through puberty, I was aware that I had, you know, tick, 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 a biological clock that I mostly ignored when I was younger, but that, you know, progressively seemed louder and louder in my head as I got older and approached my 30s. And this is true for every woman. And, you know, every decision I made as an adult had that weighed into it. It was in the back of my mind when I decided, you know, things about my career. It was in the back of my mind when I thought about family planning. It was in the back of my mind when I made every important decision in my life. And you know, the fact that my reproductive capacity was limited, you know, I personally don't have kids, and I made that decision early. But, you know, I chose to focus on my career, and whether I did that at the expense of having children, I don't think so. But, you know, there's no way for me to really answer that question. So, you know, just thinking about things from the perspective of women, you know, there's a societal imbalance that exists because women go through menopause. So related to fertility, which is what I was just talking about, but also related to health. You know, when I go through menopause in I don't know how many years, I hope a long from now, far down the road. But, you know, when I go through menopause, my body is going to change in dramatic ways, and my risk of heart disease is going to go up dramatically. My risk for cognitive decline is going to go up dramatically. There are lots of smaller but equally, you know, important and really detrimental things that are going to happen to my body because I'm going through menopause that don't happen to men or men's bodies, that are going to, you know, distract me from work, that are going to distract me from my personal life, that are going to impact my quality of life. And men don't have this. So, you know, from an equality standpoint, I can't think of anything else that is would be such an equalizer between men and women. Yeah.
Oh, that's terrific. Janice has a question that I think is also going to be sort of a good setup for next month's webinar, which is just speaking a little bit to the disconnect between maybe what researchers know or are aware of about menopause and what medical practitioners and maybe OBGYNs might be aware of. One of her comments is that, you know, she's been interested in this connection between menopause and aging for almost 30 years, but her physician never seemed to understood it.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And I don't know that it's you know, we can't lay the blame with the physicians. You know, they work with the knowledge that is out there in the world. And this is one of the major challenges that we face, is that there's just a complete lack of knowledge. We know what the symptoms are. We know, you know, kind of in a very generic way, what triggers, you know, the proximal cause of menopause, which is that a woman runs out of eggs. But we don't know why the numbers decrease over her lifespan so dramatically from 7 million down to basically 0. And we don't know what causes that quality decline either. You know, if we could increase the numbers just a little bit later in life of high quality eggs, that would be profound. But we don't know. We don't know the answers. And so, physicians do the best that they can with the knowledge that is in the world. So, Liz Ellen and I will discuss this in a lot more detail in June. But there is right now, I would say, a huge push towards coming up with treatments for the symptoms of menopause. Femtech is really a burgeoning area of investment for biotech. And if you look at those companies, most of them are treating symptoms, which is laudable and like a really important and laudable goal, to be able to treat those vasomotor symptoms like hot flashes. And just because they're not fatal doesn't mean that they don't really impair a woman's ability to live in the world. But, again, what we're trying to do here is complementary but distinct. We want to know what the causal factors are so that we can intervene. We would like to slow it down if we can, or reverse it. That would be a blue sky goal. But yeah, so tune in June, I guess is my final answer.
We received an interesting question, and I think will be a good precursor for all the future OVA webinar sessions, which is if you could speak a little bit to what a biomarker is, and what role does that play in research and also in understanding your health?
That's an excellent question. So a biomarker is simply a measure. It's a metric. It's something we can measure about a woman's body that will tell us, two things. Number one, how many eggs does she have left? And number two, how high quality are those eggs? And so that sounds simple. And unfortunately, it's not, because I think I mentioned this several times, and I say it over and over again because it's just shocking to me that we don't know what makes a good egg. So a biomarker is, it could be a blood test. It could be, right now, to give you an example, the biomarkers that we have available to examine or treat women who are having fertility issues are limited to a couple of blood tests. So we measure some hormones that are very important for reproductive function, things like estrogen and progesterone and a few others. And we also then can measure things like AMH, which is loosely correlated with the number of eggs a woman has left. Unfortunately, it's been shown to be really an unreliable biomarker. So, it's just a really poor marker. But thinking about like measuring the hormones, turns out that, a woman goes through this cycle every month where her ovary totally remodels over the course of 28 or 30 days. It changes so dramatically, and the levels of all of those hormones change with a cyclicity that is extremely complicated, and they change day by day. And so taking a snapshot of where a woman is in the middle of that, but not monitoring how they change over time, that's not super helpful. Taking a snapshot of what her AMH levels are, sometimes it correlates with the number of eggs, sometimes it doesn't. The other biomarker that we have available widely right now is ultrasound to actually count the number of active follicles that a woman has during her cycle. And again, it's a one-time measurement. It's not something that can be monitored over the course of a cycle. And, they're just really inadequate. I don't know how else to say it. It's just really inadequate. So if we could have a marker, if we could measure, a protein or a hormone or a constellation of things that would tell us with some accuracy, where is a woman in terms of her fertility clock, at the level of the individual. So we're talking about really precision medicine here. That would be huge. It would be game changing. And so that's what we mean when we say biomarkers, and diagnostics as well. So that's the other side of the biomarker coin is, having things that would allow us to precisely determine what's wrong with a woman when she can't conceive, right? There's like dozens of reasons why that could be true. And being able to quickly and easily, figure out what the cause of the infertility is, that would be amazing. I mean, it would be huge.
That's terrific. We're going to, we have a couple minutes left. We're going to, one kind of big kind of picture question, and you've touched upon it a little bit, but I think just kind of stepping back, I think there are a lot of people who are interested in kind of getting a sense of what are some of the most important takeaways, if you will, from this framing of the conversation, and really kind of, we're setting the stage for future webinars and for really where the research is going to take us, which is going to be really, that's part of the discovery process that we're all on together. But what would you say would be some of the important messages for people who are not scientists, who are listening to this webinar and trying to incorporate some of this information into their life?
Oh gosh, I would say that you know, reproductive longevity, which is really what we're talking about, is linked to overall health span and lifespan. And so understanding the fundamental drivers of reproductive aging are going to, you know, if we can do that, it will have an incredible knock-on effect in terms of understanding more fundamental drivers of aging in the rest of the body. There's nothing, you know, the link it's incredible. And, you know, if you think about the major diseases of the developed world, aging is the #1 risk factor for all of them by a lot. Cancer, heart disease, stroke. The #1 risk factor is age. And so, you know, people don't think about aging as a disease, but it is the thing that is driving all of the diseases that we want to vanquish. And it is clearly linked to reproductive span. We just don't understand how. And if we could figure out how they're linked, reproductive span and lifespan or health span, we would go a long way towards solving a lot of other age-related diseases. So this is not a female-centric problem. This is something that is going to affect every person on the planet. And I would also say that, you know, what we're trying to do here is novel. So we don't have a blueprint for this. There's not something that we can point to and say, oh yeah, we're trying to do that thing that those guys over there did. We're really pioneering a new movement. And so from my perspective as a scientist, I think scientists are not good at reaching out to the rest of the world. In fact, we're abysmally bad at it. So one of the things that we're trying to do here is to engage you, non-scientists, people who are just have an interest in this area, to engage you, not just to learn about what we're doing, but to really participate. And that means spreading the word. It means, you know, telling people what we're doing, why it's important, and you know, why you would care.
Yeah, I think, you know, and part of the piece as we kind of move along with OVA is that we're going to, in future sessions, even present some specific research projects that people are involved with and engaged with. One of the things that I think many people don't know is that philanthropy is really kind of driving a lot of this novel thinking and really filling a gap where there's not available funding today. And a lot of the novel projects and a lot of these novel questions wouldn't be studied if it wasn't for individuals making philanthropic contributions because they want to see this work done. And so in future episodes, we'll present some projects, and individuals will be presenting the opportunity to participate and support if you're interested. And that's a really fun way to get engaged as well, because you'll follow along and have opportunity to have additional conversations with the principal investigators and researchers, which it just really brings the science to life and is a great educational opportunity. We're getting close to wrapping up. And so Jennifer, as you think about kind of where we hope this will go, you know, what do you think about over the next couple of years? Like, what are some the dream that you have about where we're going to be going with the research and what we're hoping to accomplish?
I think in the next I mean, there's already really exciting research that we've nucleated, right? We've only been at this for a few years, but I think we've had a major impact on getting this started. But in the, like on the short term time scale, in the 5-year sort of horizon, I do think that finding biomarkers, so looking through existing data, but also going through existing clinical patient samples and really correlating, you know, things that we see in those samples with fertility and health outcomes. I think that finding biomarkers and possibly, you know, having that lead to diagnostics, I think that's the low-hanging fruit. These discoveries, you know, I don't want to mislead anyone. Science takes time. You know, figuring out what actually causes ovarian aging, that would be the pie in the sky long-term goal. And, you know, we're going to work on that, and we are going to push things towards that goal. But that's something that would be on a much longer time horizon. In terms of other things that I think we can look for in the next 5 to 10 years, I think that, you know, developing new models of menopause to study. You know, it turns out that we don't have great animal models of menopause, and you absolutely need to be able to model it in order to study it. You know, I don't know why they don't let us experiment on humans, but they really don't. And I think that you know, in the 10-year timescale, I think that we should be able to find a way to push the age at which a woman goes through menopause by 5 years. Maybe longer, but you know, I think we should be able to start to move things in the right direction. I would also say thank you, Brian, for inviting me. I love talking about this stuff. I also wanted to say I noticed that there are still a lot of questions in the chat. And so this is what the GCRLE network is for. So I will take the questions that are unanswered and I will answer them on the GCRLE network page. And so it's free, it's open to everybody. You can sign up and you can post thoughts or questions or documents or really anything. And so if you want to continue the conversation, we'll be doing that over at gcrle.org.